spies that Joshua sent out. Joshua sends 2 spies over into the promised land. They meet up with Rahab as they're coming to Jericho. And we learn some significant things about their encounter with her. She already knew about them and their God. We could have some discussion about how she knew that, without CNN and Fox News, cable networks. And how did she know that kind of detail about these folks? And some might say, well, she miraculously knew God. She said, we know. Indicated that that's a reputation that they had in the land, that the inhabitants of the land, not just her city, but the people in the land had that knowledge of them. Well, the spies had told her about it. She seemed to have a broader knowledge already than she's telling the spies what she knows. But we have to assume then that this reputation had preceded them. They'd wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. There's time for information about the Red Sea and those kind of things to get circulated. And they just immediately had a battle across the river in close proximity to where these folks live, and they'd be aware of that. So for whatever reason, whatever means she learned that news, she was convinced of it. And she was convinced that this land was going to be theirs. And she wanted to make sure that she was spared, she and her family. In that process, she negotiates with these spies and they agree to spare her. But she lies about them having left, and people get all in an uproar about her lying, and yet she's treated so kindly and it's not condemned as a lie, and she's in the lineage of Christ, and people just get really complex about their image of her lie. One thing you learn when you read through inspired writings is God doesn't cover up for anybody. And that's what happened. She lied. We won't spend a lot more time on that other than to say, in our atmosphere and culture of situation ethics, people use that and say, if it's for the better cause, the greater cause, then it's okay to lie. And they quote this as an example. Certainly God doesn't use it that way. He doesn't record it for us as an example of the right time and right purpose to lie. He says all liars shall have their place in the lake of fire. So I think he has an opinion of liars. So that's certainly not what he's promoting. But I brought an article, and if you'll remind me before the week's over, I'll let you make copies of it, that develops that argument. That is, looks at both sides of that argument so that you can have it for your record and have it for your notes, but because of time constraints, we don't have time to have that discussion. But God would never condone a lie, but he certainly records a lot of them. Satan lied to Adam and Eve, and he revealed that. So we have a lot of lies. Abraham lied about his wife. God didn't condone that, but he recorded it. And so we need to look at it that way and not get caught up in those things. But in her negotiating with these spies, she let them down with that scarlet thread, and they told her, you leave that thread in your window, and when we come to conquer the city, we'll spare you. Makes a good sermon when you emphasize that their safety was inside her house. And they said anybody outside that house is not going to be safe. And you can make that analogy, and those outside of Christ is not safe. Their blood's upon their head if they don't take the place of safety, as she was encouraged to take it. So she had to gather her family if she wanted to be saved inside of her house, and nobody could leave the house. They had to be there. And so they made an oath with each other, and anyone break that oath, then obviously they're going to be responsible. Notice she wants them to make that commitment, make that oath. And who does she use as the leverage and the authority and the power? It said, according to your Lord. You swear unto me by your Lord. Didn't just say, give me your word. It said, you swear by your Lord. She has confidence in their Lord, doesn't she? Yeah. So that's kind of what we are, and they bring back a good report about that to Joshua. They still remain at Shittim, where we found them a minute ago in our reading, and that's about 7 or 8 miles from the Jordan River. And the spies have been gone 3 days, and now it'll be 3 days later. The officers will go with Joshua under Joshua's command to the Jordan. And it's interesting when you read through chapter 3 and you see again the orderly conduct that's required of them, and they have to line up, and they have to stay in order, and they even have to go through the natural order of making themselves ready. Joshua told the people to sanctify themselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. You see, in this context, that's the same order of things that we have when the law was given. The people had to, first of all, sanctify themselves before they could represent the Lord and receive the Lord's blessings. They're about to go into the promised land, but before they can go forward, they have to sanctify themselves, make themselves ready. And that's always the order of faith. Even in our spiritual context, remember Paul's charge to Timothy was that he was to take heed in himself unto the doctrine, continue in them, for in doing this thou shalt both save thyself and them that hear thee. We have to start with ourselves. So these people had to sanctify themselves, make themselves ready, cleanse themselves in order to go forward. Verse 6, and Joshua spake unto the priests, saying, take up the ark of the covenant. And what does the ark of the covenant represent? The presence of God. They would misuse that, but they misused it when you get to a study of 1 Samuel. They took it into the battle with the Philistines, not under God's direction, but they took it because they knew that it represented the presence of God. But God's not going to be in their presence, and they're not doing what He told them to do. But here He tells them to take that, and that would be a symbol of His presence. And they are to pass over before the people with the ark, and the priests were to carry it. And Joshua then is represented as the commander of the people, and he is the commander through God. The Lord said unto Joshua, this day will I begin to magnify thee in the sight of Israel. See, Joshua, to us, when we read through this context, will be this gigantic leader among the people. But when you look at the context, he's only gigantic because God made him so in the eyes of the people. By Joshua doing what God told him to do, then the folks saw that God would keep His promise and that they would be saved. And He said that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. See, that's how we need to have leaders today, and that is those who are confident that God's with us and that it's God's power that we're operating by, and it's His will that we're following, and they can have confidence then in the God of heaven. Joshua said to the children of Israel in verse 9, come thither and hear the words of the Lord your God. See, while they go forward, again, they have to receive God's instruction, God's full assurance that the land is going to be theirs, and His instructions will direct their steps. They would combat those that they would face, and they would be successful. You see, folks in the land over there wouldn't have any trouble accepting gods. That wasn't a new concept to them. They believed in gods. It's just the God of heaven they didn't know. And but they knew the Israelites had a different God than they had. And the Israelites needed to remember who their God was, and that they were facing nations that had other gods that could not deliver them from the Israelites. Verse 11 through 13, we have details of the crossing of the Jordan. Everything would happen as Joshua said. 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 15 records that orderly fashion and shows it was about April that they crossed the Jordan. It would be at flood stage, and so we're talking about that time of the year. And so details will be given so that they will know how to line up. And this was 40 years lacking 5 days or so. Think about that. And he said tomorrow. Every day for 40 years, they're thinking, you know, God's going to give us the land. God's going to give us the land. They're getting closer, and Joshua tells the folks to gather, get ready. But now he says tomorrow. After all this time, all these 4 years, tomorrow. Isn't that exciting? To be there with them and know it's tomorrow. Now we've got to line up. It's not a matter of he's going to, and we've sent out spies, and they told us what it looks like, and what the condition of land is, and they've encouraged us to go up. He says, tomorrow, we're going over. And so the crossing of the Jordan required in the eyes of the people occasion for God to demonstrate His power and His might. And He said, you come and hear the words of Jehovah. Hereby shall you know that the living God is among you, and that He will without fail drive out before you the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Hivites and the Perizzites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Jebusites. Heard those names before? Mm-hmm. God knew they were in the land. All the way back in the book of Exodus, He mentioned those folks to Joshua, to Moses when He chose him to be the leader. He said, you're going to go drive those people out. Now tomorrow, they're going into the land where those people live. And He said, God is going to give you, drive out these inhabitants. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth passes over before you in the Jordan. Now keep in mind, this represents the presence of God. He said, God's going to go before you. He's going to go before you, the representation of that ark being carried by the priest. And it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests that bear the ark of the Lord, and the Lord of all the earth shall rest in the waters of Jordan, that the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off from the waters that come down from above, and they shall stand up in a heap. Now the Jordan River drops about 22 feet per mile. Imagine how rapidly that water is coming at flood stage. And He said when their feet touch that water, it's going to heap up. It's going to congeal. We think about the Red Sea and what a marvelous experience that must have been to have the east wind push that water back. But here you got a still body of water that can be parted, and they cross over, and Jordan River's at flood stage. And so God wants them to know He's still that powerful God, and He can take this body of water and heap it up and allow them to go over on dry land. And it'll stand in a heap, it said. And so it came to pass that when the people removed their tents and passed over Jordan, the priests bring the ark of the covenant before the people. As they that bear the ark were come to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark was dipped in the brink of the water, where the Jordan overflowed all of its banks all the time of harvest. I wonder why we are told that. Not been a drought, and there's not just a little branch everybody has to step over. We're talking about the Jordan River at flood stage, moving at a rapid pace, and God piles up the water for them. In this context, is Joshua a true prophet or false prophet?
True.
He had an immediate fulfillment of his prophecy, didn't he? He said, here's what's going to happen. The priests are going to go before you because God's going to go before you. And as soon as their soles of their feet touch that water, it's going to heap up. Now, what did God say to Moses? I'm going to magnify you in the eyes of the people. Now, he just proved that Joshua was a true prophet. Didn't he? You go speak to the people. He spoke to the people and said, here's what's going to happen. And God caused it to immediately happen when the sole of the feet of the priest touched the water. Now, what do they know about Joshua? He's a true prophet. When Joshua speaks, he's speaking for the Lord. Joshua is a man of God. Joshua is a servant of God. Joshua is a seer. Joshua is everything that a prophet stands for. That's Joshua. And so we're going to listen to Joshua. You see, that's what's involved. It's not just God having a chat with Joshua and we just get to overhear it. It's for us to understand why he said that and what the people witnessed when the priest's feet touched the water. And the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground. Now, this is flood stage now, but they're standing on dry land. Didn't have to wait 3 or 4 days for the sun to come out and dry things up. Is immediately they were standing on dry land. Why? Because God dried it up. And all the Israelites passed over on dry ground. Didn't say they bombed their way over. You know, they made special flotation devices and got over. It said they walked over on dry land until all the people were passed clean over Jordan. Again, I try to visualize that and all the hectic going and coming and people in Memphis. And I think, how long would it take to line those folks in orderly fashion across the Mississippi River? It'd be a feat. And so we're talking about something that has to be etched in their mind. This is not grab your family and you're over. This is a protracted marching across on dry land until everyone is over. And where are the priests all this time? Standing firm in the middle of the river until everybody crosses over. And so that becomes significant for us to pay attention to and how God expected them to react. And they did it as God told them to. Chapter 4, the 12 men appointed to take 12 stones for a memorial out of Jordan. And these first 3 verses, we have them at Gilgal. As soon as they cross over Jordan, they camp there. That will become a significant place because they'll keep coming back here and restaging themselves and going and fighting particular battles. And this will become kind of a headquarters for them. And he says in this context, take ye 12 men out of the people, out of every tribe of man. Do you think it's significant that they didn't take 12 men to send in spies, but now that they're over there, all 12 tribes are represented again? Not all 12 of them are represented as spies anymore. They tried that, and that didn't work real well. But now that God has proven that he kept his promise and they've crossed over Jordan, they're in the land, he said, you take representation from all the tribes, and you take each of them a stone, and you carry them over with you and leave them in the lodging place where you shall lodge this night. Now he said tomorrow, going to the land, tomorrow has come. And they crossed over the Jordan, and they have clean crossed over. That is, everybody's over. And now he says, before the water collapses, you go get 12 stones out of the midst of the Jordan. And you bring those over here. They're going to put 12 stones in the Jordan as a reminder, and they're going to bring 12 stones out of the Jordan and erect a memorial in the Promised Land where they were going to lodge that night. And Joshua called the 12 men whom he had prepared of the children of Israel out of every tribe of man. And there might be a significant observation there that he prepared. We ought to prepare folks for their task at hand. When God tells us to do things, we ought not just let people think we're telling them to do certain things. We ought to prepare them for it. Say, here's what God expects of us. And God has instructed us to get 12 stones out of the mist, and so here's why we're doing it. We need to prepare them for it. And they did that. Joshua did that. And they set up a memorial in verse 8 in Gilgal. The children of Israel did so as Joshua commanded, and took 12 stones out of the midst of the Jordan, as the Lord spake unto Joshua, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel. and carried them over with them unto the place which they lodged, and they laid them down there. And Joshua set up the 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests which bear the ark of the covenant stood, and he says, and they are there unto this day. It becomes significant that these things were done so that these people could not forget. When you go back up to verse 6, the reason the stones were chosen, and the reason this memorial will be erected, he says, and this may be a sign among you, that when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what mean ye by these stones? Then shall you answer them, that the waters of Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be for a memorial unto the children of Israel forever. Now hold on to that, because when we get to chapter 2 of the book of Judges, guess what it said? There arose a generation, and listen carefully, that knew not Jehovah, nor the great things which he'd done. Now why do they have a memorial? What happened to the memorial? You know how I've had it pictured, and obviously this is just my image. You don't have to have this in your notes. But I lived in Alabama for 10 years, and there's parts of Alabama that kind of like the kudzu capital of the world. This old viney thing that grows, it'll grow trees, houses, it'll cover up anything in its sight. They brought it over here from Japan to plant alongside the railroad tracks when they put the railroad in this country to keep the soil from eroding. They didn't prepare themselves ahead of time and think that through and say, how do you control it? And so it just keeps growing. And it'll cover up buildings, and trees. So I kind of have this image of kudzu growing over that memorial. These 12 stones, you neglect it, and it grows up around it, and people walk right by it and don't even see it. Memorials are supposed to be kept up, aren't they? Ever gone to a graveyard and it's just all grown up and vines and neglected? Kind of sad, isn't it? That once upon a time there was this acknowledgement of people and their importance to our lives, and nobody knows or cares anymore. You see, that becomes significant. These details that we have for God to build in these safeguards to say, here's what I've done for you. You see who your leader is, and you see he is a true prophet. And you know he's following me, and so you can follow him. And now you bring out these stones so that you don't forget how you got over here. And so when your children say, what do these stones mean? Say, oh, let me tell you about God. Let me tell you what he did. You know, we live in this land, and we have this prosperity, and we enjoy these things because God stopped that Jordan River at flood phase. These stones were put here to remind us of what he did. Now, what happens when we commune around the Lord's table? You do show the Lord's death at a time. Is it really important to do it every first of the week? I mean, don't we get too ritualistic? Well, you can in your mind. You see, every time we observe it, we want to say, here's what our God did for us. And that might kind of dispel what people misrepresent about our God. He's always been a loving God. He's always want to be remembered. He's always wanted us to remember that when we do what he tells us to do, he'll always take care of us. He's always had memorials to say, don't forget that. You know, here's what I've done for you. Now, build in these safeguards so you don't forget. But if we ever let our guard down and say, that's really not important. I mean, you're putting too much emphasis on those kind of things when he said, no, it's so you can remember. That's the significance of this memorial. So they erect those stones there for that purpose. And that memorial is set up, and when you get to verse 10 and following, and they finally let the priest come on over, and Joshua speaks unto the people according to all that Moses commanded Joshua. The people hastened and passed over. It came to pass that all the people were clean passed over. The ark of the Lord passed over. The priest in the presence of the people. And the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh passed over, armed before the children of Israel, as Moses spake unto them. Why are they armed? Because they're coming into the promised land with a commission. They're about to drive out the enemies. So they come over prepared to drive out the enemies. And again, make good sermon material, doesn't it? We ought to make sure that we are armed to fight the enemy and do what God tells us to do. And again, going back to Numbers chapter 32, that's where Moses commanded the Reubenites and the Gadites and that half-tribe Manasseh. And so, you know, you got probably 40,000 folks or so going over to help the brethren fight. When you get to verse 13 and 14, he kind of takes us back to what he promised in chapter 3 and verse 7. He magnified Moses, or rather Joshua, in their sight. He said, on that day the Lord magnified Joshua in the sight of all of Israel, and they feared him as they feared Moses all the days of his life. And the Lord spake unto Joshua, saying, command the priests to bear the ark of testimony, that they come up out of the Jordan. And Joshua therefore commanded the priests, saying, come ye up out of the Jordan. You say, why these details? Well, you see folks doing what God told them to do, and it turns out the way God tells them it's going to turn out. Seems like a real simple thing, but it becomes a very difficult thing for us to hold on to that in our everyday life. Sometimes we get distracted. And here you have these priests standing there the whole time. They don't come out until the man who told them to go in tells them to come out. When God wanted to give Joshua direction, they fear Joshua. In other words, they reverence him as a man of God, as a prophet for God. Why? God magnified Joshua in their eyes. They don't question that God's speaking through Joshua. And so they responded that way. And when we have spiritual leaders like that today, you read passages like Hebrews chapter 13, and we're told that we are to obey them to have the rule over us. And the motivation behind that is, for we understand that they watch for our souls, that they must give an account. You see, we're in this thing together. Joshua wasn't doing this just so he could be a leader of a nation of people. Joshua's doing this because God commanded him to. And so that the people could have the promise that God bestowed upon them. Spiritual leaders today are the same way. You don't become leaders of the church so you can have some kind of status position, or you can have accolades of men. You do that so that you can take the people of God and lead them where God wants them to be. And that's for their soul to be saved. They watch for your soul. They're shepherds. And so it ought to be in our attitude and disposition toward those things today. So we have them over in the land, and we see their attitude toward Joshua down through verse 18 or so. And the people came up out of the Jordan the 10th day of the first month. And this is the month Abib. And so now they're in Canaan. 5 days, like 5 days in 40 years. Again, we're just rejoiced to be those who can witness that we finally get there. If you are a student of the Bible and you read through the Bible and you follow those stories and those promises and those successes and those failures, you get to a point like this and you see the people finally in a triumphant way there. Verse 19, it said the people came up out of the Jordan on that 10th day of the first month and encamped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. That becomes significant because Jericho is going to be that first battle. So they're close to it. And there's some things that happen here in this context that's significant. Those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, did Joshua pitch in Gilgal? Why? Well, God told him to. You take the 12 stones, and where you're going to stay tonight, that's where you're going to put the stones. Where they're staying tonight, Gilgal. What they got with them, 12 stones. What are they going to do with them? They're going to do what God told them to do. And he spake to the children of Israel, saying, now listen carefully, when your children shall ask their fathers in the time to come, saying, what mean these stones? Then you shall let your children know, saying, Israel came up over this Jordan on dry land. And the Lord your God dried up the waters of Jordan from before you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up from before us until we were gone over, that all the people of the earth might know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, and that ye might fear the Lord your God forever. So why did he do this? So this generation will know who he is. We'll see his power and his might, and they're going to have to carry out his bidding in this land of Canaan. And so he wanted them to be fully equipped with their knowledge of who he is and what his power is. I wonder how long it took for that news to get to Rahab. She knew they were coming. She knew why they were coming. She knew what God had done at the Red Sea. You think she's going to learn more from Jordan, really? You would think so. In Gilgal, we have a number of things that will take place here. The putting of the 12 stones will take place there. Circumcision takes place at Gilgal. They celebrate the first Passover in the Promised Land at Gilgal. Joshua returns here after each battle as they conquer the land at Gilgal. This is a staging area. The manna will cease. What's the manna all about? It's what God fed them with when they were wandering in the wilderness. And they had to prepare their victuals, you remember, to go in. When they get to Gilgal, they're not going to eat manna. They're going to eat the old grain. And so the first meal that they don't pick up like the dew off the ground in the morning, that must have been the experience too. I mean, 40 years, every day, 6 days a week, you go out and pick up manna. And now, you ever wonder what they must have been like that they just habitually got up, picked up the manna? You think anybody got up at this regular time and walked out and, oh, yeah, we're not going to pick up manna anymore. Mm-hmm. You know, it just kind of gets in your mind, you know, to do that. And these little, I say little, not anything little about them, but these truths that are revealed to us give us some insight as to this significant event. They're there in the Promised Land. But now God is not going to do for them what they can do for themselves. If they defeat the enemy, guess what they're going to find? Exactly what God promised. Vineyards already planted. These folks will already have harvested their crops. What did Rahab have on her roof? Flax. Well, if you take Jericho, guess what everybody else is going to have on their roof? So guess what you're going to have to eat? Well, guess what happens if you don't defeat the enemy? The manna has ceased, and you have no food. You can say, well, God, you always fed us, and, you know, we don't want to fight these battles, but, you know, if you are really a loving God, you keep feeding us. And he said, you're here now. If you're here, defeat these enemies. And you've seen the land now. If you defeat the enemy, you're going to have plenty to eat. Why? They've already planted it for you. In fact, they've already harvested for you. It's ready for you. Now, you're going to do what I tell you to do. And the same kind of thing is true today. How many times the Lord in the New Testament context said, don't stay there yet 4 months and then come at the harvest. Lift up your eyes and look on the field. They're white already unto harvest. And we say, well, I don't think anybody's interested today. Oh, there was a time when you could preach the truth and folks would respond to it, and there were just hordes of people, and it's not like that today. People are just not interested in truth. How do you know that? How do you know that? Well, you just look around you. How many people responded? Well, how many people are preaching? Well, but you know, no, I don't know. But what I know is this. If God told us to do it, we can do it. If God told us to do it, there's a purpose he told us to do it. And we can't get into God's business. We just have to do it. And these folks had a job to do, and now they're about to get busy and do it. The purpose of this memorial has been repeated, and that is so the people, the next generation, could be reminded of who God was and what God would do. When we get to chapter 5, here at Gilgal, it'll say Israel had their reproach rolled away here. And they're finally here, and everything that stood for defeat and their marred relationship with God would be removed because he kept his promise. And they have arrived. So we get to chapter 5, that when all the kings of Amorites, so that answer my question, how long did it take for them to hear? Well, they must have all had cable television. Said, whoa, did you see that? And it came to pass that all the kings of the Amorites which were on the side of the Jordan westward, and all the kings of the Canaanites which were by the sea, heard, now listen carefully, heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of Jordan from before the children of Israel until we were passed over, and their hearts melted. What did Rahab say happened? Because of the Red Sea? Because of the kings on the other side of the river were defeated? Our hearts melted. Now what are these kings on this side of the river saying? They're here. And their God got them here. And their God stopped the Jordan River. Don't you know that they kind of felt a little bit safe that time of the year? The Israelites are over there in this flood stage, so we got a little time here. They're going to try to figure out a way to get over here. But we're over here, and they're over there. But now who do they give credit for it? Their Lord had done it again. Their God has got them across the Red Sea, has defeated their enemies all along the way, and now he stopped the Jordan River in flood stage. And so they're here. He said, they said of him, they dried up from before the children of Israel until we were passed over, and their hearts melted. Neither was their spirit in them anymore because of the children of Israel. A whole generation died in the wilderness for nothing. Really? I mean, they died there. They didn't have to die there. But they melted because of the people of the land, and the people of the land were melting because of them all the time. And at that time the Lord said unto Joshua, make thee sharp knives, and circumcise again the children of Israel the second time. And Joshua made him sharp knives, and circumcised the children of Israel at the heel of the foreskin. And this is the cause why Joshua did circumcise all the people that came up out of Egypt that were males. Even all the men of war died in the wilderness, by the way, after that they came up out of Egypt. And so what do we have? A generation that's grown up that hadn't been circumcised. And now they're going to circumcise them because now they're in the land, and they're going to represent God, and they'll be distinguished from the people of the land through their circumcision. And all the people that came out had to be circumcised. Those that came out of Egypt had already been, and now this generation that grew up hadn't been, and God's calling upon Joshua to take care of that. And he said, for the children of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness. And that just makes you tired to think about it, doesn't it? It's just wandering around that wilderness, going where? Nowhere. What happens today when we just wander around and around and around and not really go where God tells us to go? Where are we going? Nowhere. And so we need to learn the lessons that are before us. And he repeats the oath of Jehovah when the people had disobeyed him in the wilderness. Verse 6 indicates why they were there and why they were consumed. Why bring that up? Well, you disobey God now, and he's not going to support you, not going to encourage you. He's not going to be with you. So you have a second chance. You have an opportunity to represent him. All these symbols, the 12 stones, and now this circumcision, was to make sure they knew how they got here and who they represented. They represent God. And they got here because of God. When you get to verse 10, it said, well, I mentioned verse 9 earlier. And the Lord said unto Joshua, this day have I rolled away the reproach of Egypt from off you. Wherefore the name of the place is called Gilgal unto this day. So significant that he's removed their past and they have a brand new beginning. And all the failures of the past can be replaced with the successes of the present. Verse 10, the children of Israel encamped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month, at even in the plains of Jericho. So that's one of those things we said took place at Gilgal, was observing the Passover. For the first time in the Promised Land, we went from get your victuals and stuff together, the time is at hand, to we're going over tomorrow, to line up, to now encamping in the land, and now observing the Passover. Wow. You know, it's you think of a little different atmosphere with this Passover than any Passover they've observed thus far. Always significant, because God delivered their firstborn by them being obedient and sprinkling the blood over their doorpost, and so it's always to remind them of God's deliverance. But now they have entered the Promised Land, and now we have a new significant placed upon this Passover, and they understood it, and now they're able to practice those things in a way that if they continue to practice them, they should never forget God. Now, verse 12 was another significant event that we said took place at Gilgal. And the manna ceased on the morrow, after they had eaten the old corn of the land. Neither had the children of Israel manna any more, but they did eat the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. Everything he promised them is coming true. And they will continue to come true as long as they're faithful to his cause. We don't need to forget God's promises today. And everything he's promised us will come true as long as we keep his instruction for our life. And that will always be the case. So 2 days after that end of the Passover, in the month of Abib, the 16th of the month, the manna ceased. And verse 13 and 14, Joshua sees the captains of the host. It came to pass that Joshua was by Jericho, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there stood a man over against him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went unto him and said unto him, Art thou for us, or for our adversaries? And he said, Nay, but as a captain of the host of the Lord am I come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and did worship, and said unto him, What saith my Lord unto his servant? And the captain of the host said unto Joshua, Loose thy shoes from off thy foot, for the place whereon thou standest is holy. And Joshua did so. That sound familiar to you? You know, he said to Joshua in that first chapter, You're it. Moses is dead, and you're the new leader. As I was with Moses, I'll be with you. And now the conquest is about to start. They're in the land. They've got to start the battles. Who's the leader? Joshua. And God uses this as an opportunity to let Joshua be in his presence and to have a similar experience to what Moses had. As he told Moses, after that experience, you're going to go back and tell Pharaoh, let my people go, and I'm going to take them into the land, keep the promise I made with Abraham. And they are in the land already, the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Jebusites, and you're going to utterly destroy them. That process is about to start, and Joshua has a similar experience that Moses had. So we have to assume he's in the presence of the Lord. We have many other occasions where angels or men have represented God, and when people fell down to worship them, they were forbidden to. Joshua isn't forbidden to fall down and worship the captain of the host. But we have to assume that God's represented here in this context. In fact, the captain of the host said, "You're standing on holy ground, and you make sure that you remove your shoes from your feet because you're standing on holy ground." And so he's preparing Joshua for the task at hand, and God always prepares his leaders for the task at hand. In those first 6 verses, we have described what Jericho is like. It's shut up. It said it was straightly shut up. It means it was narrow and difficult. This is going to be, a military feat. If you just took them on, this wasn't going to be an easy task. We have something about this context revealed for us in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 30. It refers back to Joshua and his leading the children of Israel, and for them being successful. It says, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down, and after they were compassed about 7 days. And so the New Testament refers back to this occasion we're about to read about in chapter 6, the conquering of Jericho. I think I also brought an article that will give some archaeological finds in reference to Jericho and might be helpful to you. I'll try to remember to bring those tomorrow. So God gave them Jericho, and it speaks as if it's already happened. Joshua is informed by the Lord, I have given into thy hand Jericho. Now they haven't approached Jericho. They haven't gone to battle with Jericho. They have not defeated Jericho. And yet God says to Joshua what? It's already yours. Well, he said similar things about the promised land, didn't he? It's already yours. But there's some things that you're going to have to do to comply with my wishes and my will. And so he tells them how to compass the city, all the men of war. And they'll go about the city once, and you'll do that in 6 days. Have you ever kind of put yourself inside the walls of Jericho and watched that sight where all these masses of people come out, and you got this reputation, well, that first day, you got this anticipation. Here they are. We've dreaded this, our hearts melted because of this, and here they come. And they start marching around that city, and you think, this is it. And you're all braced and ready, and then they just march off. That must have been a sight. And you think, what was that all about? And you kind of relax for a minute. And so he describes what they're going to do when they're compassing the city. The 7 priests shall bear before them the ark. Before the ark, 7 trumpets of ram's horn. And the 7th day you shall compass the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow with trumpets. It shall come to pass that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the walls of the city shall fall down flat, and the people shall ascend up, every man straight before him. And Joshua the son of Nun, listen carefully. Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said unto them, take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord. What does that sound like to you? Joshua responding verbatim to what God told him to do. He didn't say, all right, here's what we're going to do. And start manipulating or adjusting or tweaking God's commandments. Said, I'm a military leader. I've fought battles before, and here's what we're going to do. He said exactly what God said. Now, when that comes to pass, and Joshua stands before the people, and he says, here's what we're going to do. Here's what God told us to do. And we get to the 7th day, and we're going to compass that city 7 times. And on that 7th time, you're going to blow those ram's horn, and the wall is going to fall down. When that takes place, would they believe Joshua was a true prophet or false prophet? True prophet. God said, I'm going to magnify you in the eyes of the people. Now let's just think back to what happened when God told Moses, speak to the rock. And he smote it. And he reminded Moses all along the way, you caused the people not to believe me. When Joshua does what God tells him to do, and he rehearses these instructions and encourages and leads the people in to be obedient to the Lord's able to accomplish what he wants to accomplish. When Moses was disobedient, God wasn't able. Why? Because Moses just reacted the way Moses wanted to react. And because of that, it caused this attitude and disposition of people that God didn't want nor need when he was going to lead them in the promised land. When you look at this context, it gives us a good image of God extending grace to the Israelites, giving them a battle that they had not earned. But because of his kindness and his mercy, it was theirs. He said it ahead of time, it's yours. And now, by them responding the way God told them to respond, there wasn't any military strategy for that. They didn't do it because they were great in number. They did it because of God's graciousness. Romans chapter 6 and verse 23 says, the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. God's already extended eternal life to us. The question is, will we appropriate his grace? Will we accept his grace by doing what he tells us to do? Will we earn it by doing that? Absolutely not. We don't deserve it. We couldn't earn it. But if we do what God tells us to do, then he has said he's extended to us. Had they stopped on the sixth day and just said, look, we're tired of doing this, go ahead and blow the trumpet, what do you think would happen? The wall certainly wouldn't fall. There might have been some other things happen, but not written presently. But the walls would not have fallen. Why? Because they didn't appropriate the grace. God said, I've already given it to you. Now you just go out and watch it. And you go out and see it the way I've told you it would be. You see, when we start getting in the way and we start inserting our opinion of things, then we can't see what God's doing. When we stand back and do what God tells us to do, we can say, that's what that's about. And that's how God's going to do it. And that's what God said would be accomplished. We know something about the ram's horns from Leviticus chapter 25 and verse 11 in connection with the Jubilee. And 7 is a perfect number in the Scriptures, and so he's placing before them this perfect victory that would be given to them of God, and they could perfectly follow the Lord by meeting these specifications, and a lot of these symbols were for that purpose. Then on the seventh day, the people could shout. Now, all this time, they just had to compass the city and leave the scene. And on that seventh day, when they compassed the city about 7 times, then they could blow the trumpets and shout. And you kind of get the feeling it might have built up inside them. And so they rose early. It says in that context, they rose early. In fact, when you read through the book of Joshua, when you read through Hebrew history, there are many great leaders that it described to us that they rose early. Joshua, verse 12, rose early in the morning, and the priest took up the ark of the Lord. Leaders will get up early and prepare themselves and prepare the people to do the Lord's bidding. So they don't wait around about it. They don't sleep in. They don't find a better day. And, how many times do we spend occasions saying, as soon as winter's over, as soon as we complete Vacation Bible School, just as soon as our gospel meeting is over, next thing you know, we've gone the whole year and talked about what we're going to do, but never really done it. But here they get up early, prepare to do it. And today is going to be the day that they start this process. This is the first day. And they go compass the city and take care of all those things for 6 days. And now we get to the day of, and they get up early, and the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets, the ram's horn before the ark of the Lord, went on continually and blew the trumpet, and the armed men went before them, but the rearward came after the ark of the Lord, and the priests going on and blowing the trumpet. Who told them to do that? Well, God did. Are they doing it the way He told them to do it? Yes, they are. And so the second day they do likewise, and they continue that until they complete the 7 days. And the Lord Lord gives them specific instructions in verse 17 and following, and said, the city shall be accursed, even it and all that are therein, to the Lord. Only Rahab, the harlot, shall live, she and all that are with her in the house, because she hid the messengers we sent. And so, have they forgotten the oath? No, even in this preparation for the battle, they haven't forgotten Rahab. And so he rehearses to them they're not to take any of the thing from the city. It's to be offered unto the Lord. The silver and the gold and the vessels, the brass and iron are consecrated to the Lord, verse 19. And they'll come into the treasury of the Lord. They'll not be taken by individuals as spoils of war. Why? This is the battle of the Lord. And he wants them to know he's given this into their hand. And they are to respond in obedience. And so the people shouted when the priest blew the trumpet, and it came to pass that the people heard the sound of the trumpet. The people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. And the people went up into the city, and every man straight before him. And they took the city, and they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, ox and sheep and ass, with the edge of the sword. Why? Because God told them to. And Joshua said unto the two men that spied out the country, go into the harlot's house and bring out thence the woman and all that she hath, as ye swear unto her. Again, you're right in the middle of battle. Who best to go in and fetch Rahab than the one to know where Rahab is, and who made the oath to represent the children of Israel? And so the young men that were spies went in and brought out Rahab. Now listen, her father, her mother, her brethren, and all that she had, and they brought them out, all her kindred, and left them without the camp of Israel. That's what she wanted. She said, when he gives you the land, we've known you're coming. Our hearts are melted because of you, because we know your God, the great things he's done. And so when your Lord gives you this land, then you spare me in my house. You ever contemplated what that conversation must have been like when Rahab was assembling her family? You see, it seemed to be a broader reputation of the Israelites that everybody knew about it. And, she had to take some chances. I don't know if her family was like my family, but, there's some folks in your family, you tell them this is a secret, and that's the wrong thing to tell them. They go tell everybody. But somehow these folks assembled in her house, and she must have told them why they were there, and must have told them they can't go out of the house, because what's going to happen if they do? They'll die like everybody else. And so they must have been told that, because where are they? In the house. And did the spies keep their word?
Yeah.
They did. Did Rahab believe what the spies said? She did. And they burned the city with fire, and all that was therein, all the silver and the gold, and vessels of brass and iron, they brought into the treasure of the house of the Lord. And Joshua saved Rahab, the harlot, alive, in her father's house, and all that she had, and she dwelt in Israel even unto this day, because she hid the messengers which Jehovah sent to spy out the land. And in all that list of the hall of fame of the faithful and people of great faith in Hebrews chapter 11, Rahab is listed. You see, she didn't have Abraham's blood flowing in her veins, but she had Abraham's faith in her life. Same kind of faith. She believed in God. And she trusted in that God and was willing to submit herself to that God. And because of that, God recognized it and was able to use her in a mighty way. And Joshua adjured them at that time, saying, Cursed be the man before the Lord that riseth up and buildeth the city of Jericho. He shall lay the foundation thereof with his firstborn, and in his youngest shall he set up the gates of it. In 1 Kings chapter 16 and verse 34, we have someone trying to do that. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was noised throughout all the country. What did he say to do with Joshua? Magnify your name. Has he done that? Boy, everybody's heard about Joshua. Why have they heard about him? Because he's following the Lord. And the Lord's able to provide him power and might and courage and success, and so his reputation builds. We'll see in chapter, in fact, I think I mentioned to you 1 Kings chapter 16, where Hiel tries to rebuild the city, and he lost his 2 sons. Now, Joshua, true prophet or false prophet? True prophet, why? What he said came to pass. Now, sometimes hundreds of years pass. People are like, well, we didn't make any connections with that, but we certainly make that connection because we understand the difference between a true prophet and a false prophet. We'll get to chapter 7. We look particularly at the Israelites being smitten at Ai, and so because they committed a trespass, we learn about Achan and what he had done, taken something from the city. And so because of that, they're going up against a smaller city that doesn't seem to be a lot of challenge to them. In fact, the people are somewhat overconfident, aren't they? They say, we don't need as many folks in a small city, and they can't stand against us. And let us go up, verse 3, but let us take 2,000 or 3,000 men and go up and smite Ai, and make not all the people to labor thither, for they are but a few. They're looking at the people in comparison to what they think they can do. So they go up with those 3,000, and inhabitants of Ai smite them in verse 5. And Joshua is just distraught. Verse 6, he rents his clothes, and he falls on the earth on his face, and before the ark of the Lord until eventide, the elders of Israel put dust upon their heads. And Joshua said, O alas, O Lord God, wherefore hast thou at all brought this people over Jordan, to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites, to destroy us? Would to God we had been content to dwell on the other side of Jordan. Does that sound familiar to you? You know, back earlier they said, why didn't you leave us in Egypt? We'd rather die in familiar surroundings than be out here and die. And so even this great leader Joshua is overwhelmed by this defeat. They have to flee before this little tiny city of Ai, and they had 36 men die. And so he just stopped, shocked and stunned. Oh Lord, what shall I say? When Israel turneth their backs before their enemy, they had to run from this little city. What am I supposed to say? See, he's a military leader, and he's used to going and facing the enemy and not running from the enemy and trusting in God, and he doesn't understand why they've been defeated. He said, for the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land shall hear of it, and shall environ us around and cut off our name from the earth. And what wilt thou do unto thy great name? What will they do to your name if we get that kind of reputation? This little city that defeated us. Notice what the Lord said to Joshua, verse 10. Get thee up. Wherefore liest thou upon thy face? What did he say to him? Get up. I'm tired of hearing you crying. You know, is God going to let him be defeated without a cause? Should Joshua have known that? He should have. But again, he's human. And God records it just the way it happened. He could have left that part out. We had this image of Joshua we never would have felt like we could have measured up to. But God said even this great leader lost his vision, his courage, and sight. And he didn't just approach God and say, okay, I know something must have happened here. You're going to inform me what that is, we'll take care of it. He just said, we've been defeated, and, you know, it's all over. And the Lord said, get up. I'm tired of hearing you cry. And got things for you to do. There's a reason for you to be defeated. Why are you lying there upon your face? Israel hath sinned. Now, again, that contrast between this hateful, mean, vengeful God and this loving, compassionate God. Why are they defeated? Because he's having a bad day? No, because of sin. God's not going to tolerate sin, not even among His own people. And so He's not going to give them triumph when they have disobeyed Him. He said, and they have transgressed my covenant. What was the covenant? Don't take any of the things from the city. You leave those. All the riches are to be mine, and everything else is to be destroyed. You not take the spoils of the city for yourself, and therefore the children of Israel could not stand before their enemies. Why? Because they disobeyed Him. Not going to stand before the enemy. Verse 13 says, up. So he reminds them again, you get up. Sanctify the people, and say, sanctify yourselves against tomorrow. For thus saith the Lord God of Israel, there is an accursed thing in the midst of thee. O Israel, thou canst not stand before thine enemies until you take away the accursed thing from among you. He took those wedges of gold, and that silver, and that Babylonian garment. Who did that? Achan. The next few verses describe to us the process. God's always orderly. And, there's this dramatic process to identify who has sinned. And they collect the nation together, the people together, and they separate them again into tribes. And then they narrow it down to families. And then they get to the family. And then they get to the individual. When you read through that, just place yourself in that context, particularly from Achan's vantage point. Has he had any experience beforehand about how God ordered things and the casting of lots and finding out of sin? Well, sure he had. He knew he had brethren who died in the wilderness because of sin. So he's aware that God's not going to tolerate it. Why did He do it? We have this little lie we tell ourselves. It doesn't mean me. It means those people that do real hideous things. People are just real ugly, and it doesn't mean me. And so he didn't apply it to himself. We would have a better impression of Achan if he just stepped forward and said, no need to go through that process on the land. Wouldn't you? I would. God would still have him punished, and they would still have to remove him from their midst. But who knows? God might have spared his family if he'd just taken responsibility for it. But you see, when he took it in his tent, he buried it there. Did anybody know about that? It's kind of hard to bury something in a tent without your family knowing about it. So we read the rest of the story, and we see that when they narrow it down to Achan, and when Joshua confronts him with it, then he brings Achan and his family all along, and they stone them all. You think, well, that's a little extreme, isn't it? It said Achan took it, so why would you stone his wife, his children, and his livestock? And it's to demonstrate before the people that God's not going to tolerate it. Not only in those who do the deed themselves, but those who have pleasure in them to do so. No one told on Achan. Nobody in his family reported it. Surely they had to know it. You don't dig a hole in your tent and bury that much stuff without somebody seeing fresh soil, would you think? But anyway, the long and short of the story in chapter 7 is there was a pause in their victory because of sin. And usually when we look around us in our personal lives and in our congregational experiences, sometimes we're doing real well and we get a little distracted or somebody gets caught up in a situation and sin occurs, and what happens? There's this pause you have to go through to say, oh my, why did that happen? Gets everybody discouraged and despondent, and we have to address that issue before we can go forward. So we have to address this issue before we can go forward. And sometimes in a congregation, great things are going on, and somebody sins and discourages everybody. What do we have to do? We have to pause. Unfortunately, we never take the pause button off sometimes. We pause and address the sin and think, oh, this is terrible. We used to Oh, everybody was so excited about serving the Lord, but we hadn't been excited since so-and-so, you know. It hadn't been the same congregation since. Oh, we used to have gospel meetings and we'd go on campaigns and we had folks out door knocking, we had all kinds of things. But then so-and-so happened, we hadn't been the same congregation since. Well, you're going to see Israel picks up after Ai and they go forward, but the sin had to be removed. And so they're defeated in Ai because of the sin that's in the camp. And then they have to regroup and go forward. And it's pretty dramatic when they gather Achan in verse 24 and his family and the garment and the wedge of gold and sons and daughters and oxen and asses and sheep and tent and all that he had. And they brought it into the valley of Achor. And Joshua said, "Why hast thou troubled us? The Lord shall trouble thee this day." And all of Israel stoned them with stones, and burned them with fire, after they had stoned them with stones. Why? To demonstrate God is not going to tolerate sin. You know, those who sin are going to be in a place, it said, of fire and brimstone. God's not going to tolerate sin. And so here's a visual aid for folks to see in this particular context. He's not going to tolerate it. He's wants it removed from his midst. And it sounds a little bit like Colossians chapter 3 when it says that we are to mortify those things of the flesh. Put them to death. And we might have to just drag them out in public and say, here they are. And they're removed from my life. I'm going to put them to death for everybody to see. We don't just secretly stop. You know, we have to say, I know it's a sin. And it's going to be put to death. And put to death for good. And so, evidently his family had a part in this theft. Back in Deuteronomy chapter 7 verse 28, they were told how to handle such matters. We mentioned the passage from Colossians chapter 3 and mortifying those things of the flesh. Paul specifically says in chapter 3 and verse 5 that covetousness is idolatry. And so if we're covetous people, we are just like Achan. We say, I'm going to take this even though it belongs to the Lord. It's supposed to be consecrated to Him. I'm going to take it anyway. So we have to guard ourselves against those things. Now God encourages Joshua. You know, Joshua was all crying and lying on his face, and God said, get up. There's a reason for this to happen, and I'm not going to tolerate that. You need to know what it is. But now he encourages Joshua. And he said unto Joshua, fear not, neither be thou dismayed. Have you heard that before? He has. Take all the people of war with thee, and arise, go up to Ai, and see I have given into thy hand the king of Ai and his people, and his city and his land. What didn't happen earlier? What wasn't reported for us earlier? Who decided to go up to Ai? Did God say, okay, it's time to go up to Ai? They said, okay, Ai's next. And so we're going up. Don't take as many of us. There's about 2,000 or 3,000 folks been up. No use of all of us going up. But they're making all these plans without God. How did they go against Jericho? Under God's direction. Now how are they going against Ai? Under God's direction. You see, for that moment in time, Joshua and the people kind of forgot to say, okay, Lord, is Ai next? Is that what you want us to do? Remember the Lord told him, you don't let my word fall to the ground. Now, did they have word from God to go up against Ai in chapter 7? They didn't. Do they have word to go up against Ai in chapter 8? They do. It's only when we're going up according to God's instructions that we are to be of good courage and not be dismayed. When we take it upon ourselves to do things in our own way, at our own times, then we might have reason to pause. And now God kind of comes up with a game plan and tells them how they're going to go against Ai. And he said, and thou shalt do to Ai and her king as thou did to Jericho. He said he'd given it to their hand already, just like he did Jericho. He tells them ahead of time what they're going to have. And He tells them they're going to set an ambush. So here's God talking in military terms and saying, you're going to set an ambush for them. You see, these people had defeated the Israelites, so they're feeling pretty good about themselves. Verse 3 says, and Joshua rose, and all the people of war, and they go up against Ai. Joshua chose 30,000 mighty men. How many did they say they thought they needed before?
3.
3,000. Now all of a sudden, 30,000 folks, mighty men of valor. He sent them away by night. So these are not all of them. This is one he's sending to help lay the ambush. And he commanded them, saying, behold, you shall lie in wait against the city, even before the city, and go not very far from the city, but be ye all ready. And then it describes how they're going to take the city in the context of chapter 8, and the details are laid out. And 5,000 are in ambush on the west side of the city, and 30,000 behind the city. And the whole point was to make Ai think that they could take the 5,000 men. They had defeated 3,000 and put them to chase. And so now in this context, they think that's happening again. So when they go up against the city, the plan is that they would draw the forces and run like they did before. You see, that's what Joshua was crying about, wasn't it? He said, we've turned our back on our enemy. We ran. And how are we going to be respected, and how's your name going to be glorified when your people had to flee? And so it's going to look like they're doing that again. They're going to lure the people out of the city. And folks of Ai, in Joshua's verse 9, sent them forth. They went to lie in ambush and abode between Bethel and Ai on the west side. So Joshua lodged the night among the people. And Joshua rose up early. There he is, getting up early again. Maybe we can learn anything from leaders that get up early. He rose up early in the morning and numbered the people and went up, and the elders of Israel before the people in Ai. Suppose we can learn anything about leaders being out front and leading folks. Instead of saying, y'all go on now. We'll give you any money you need. Just go on now. And he took about 5,000 men and set them lie in ambush between Bethel and Ai on the west side. When they had set the people, even all the host that was on the north side, and their liers in wait on the west side of the city, Joshua went that night into the midst of the valley. It came to pass when the city of Ai, the king of Ai, saw it, that they hasted and rose up early. The men of the city went out against Israel to battle, he and all his people, at a time appointed before the plain, but he wist not that there were liers in ambush against him behind the city. And you almost get the impression, don't you, that maybe before, some of the people of Ai chased the Israelites, but now don't you get the impression that everybody wants a part of it? I mean, they beat these Israelites and they're running again. I'll chase them. If they're going to run, I'm not scared of them. Their hearts had melted before because they've heard about all their victories. But now they've been part of one of Israel's defeats, and so they're overconfident. And they're not paying attention to what's going on. Did God know that ahead of time? Yep, he said, we're going to ambush them. They'll think they're successful, and we're going to ambush them. So Joshua does exactly what God tells him to do and the way he tells him to do it. And all the people that were in Ai were called together to pursue after them. So they wanted everybody to be a part of this defeat of the Israelites. And they pursued after Joshua and were drawn away from the city. And they were not a man left in Ai or Bethel. Bethel's this little outpost. They went not out after Israel, and they left the city open and pursued after Israel. The Lord said unto Joshua, stretch out the spear that is in thine hand toward Ai, for I will give it into thine hand. And Joshua stretched out the spear that he had in his hand toward the city. And the ambush arose quickly out of their place, and they ran as soon as he had stretched out his hand, and they entered into the city and took it, and haste and set the city on fire. And when the men of Ai looked behind them, They saw, and behold, the smoke of the city ascended up to heaven, and they had no power to flee this way or that. And the people that fled to the wilderness turned back of the pursuers. And when Joshua and all of Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city, that the smoke of the city ascended, they turned again and slew the men of Ai. And the other issued out of the city against them, so that they were in the midst of Israel, some on this side and some on that side, and they smote them, so that they left none of them remain or escape. And the king of Ai they took alive and brought him to Joshua. So here they are successful. Why? Whose instructions are they following? God. What did the first chapter say would be required of having success? What are they going to have to do? They're going to have to follow the instructions of the Lord. That's how you're successful. That's how you make sure that God will be with you, is when you're doing what He tells you to do. And He said, you don't turn to the right hand or to the left. You do what I tell you to do. When Achan took the Babylonian garments, did they turn to the right hand or to the left? Well, they did. And did they let his word drop to the ground? They did. Or Achan did. And Israel was punished because of him. And so this time, that is after the defeat at Ai, they bring this king to Joshua, and in this context, you have the children of Israel allowed to take the cattle and the spoils of the city. And what were they not allowed to do at Jericho?
Take the spoils of the city.
Right, they weren't allowed to take the spoils of the city. And now He's allowing them to be participants in that. You see, when we do what God tells us to do, He still blesses us in His own time, in His own way. When we get greedy and we try to do it our way, then we lose those things we thought we had to have, and we lose God's blessings in our life. And then the king doesn't fare well. That is the king of Ai. He's hanged on a tree until the eventide. And then Joshua takes down his carcass from the tree and demonstrated their defeat of this king and this city. And Joshua built an altar of the Lord, the God of Israel, in the Mount of Ebal. And he said, he calls the people together, and as Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded the children of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of whole stone, over which no man hath lifted up his iron. And they offered their own burnt offerings unto the Lord, and sacrificed peace offerings. And he wrote there upon the stone a copy of the law of Moses, which he wrote in the presence of the children of Israel. Why? They're now in the land. What's going to govern them? The laws of God. And so, will Joshua come up with new laws? No. The laws that God gave Moses. Who was with Moses when he went in the mountain? He didn't go all the way to the top and receive the commandments with Moses, but who went part way up the mountain with Moses when he received the commandments? Joshua did. So he remembered the rebellion of the people and Moses having to go back into the mountain. And he knew the whole process. And so he's calling the children of Israel together, and he's reminding them of that law. And he's writing that upon stone so they can't forget it. And all of Israel and their elders, verse 33, and officers and their judges stood on this side, the ark, and on that side before the priests, the Levites, which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, as well as the strangers, as he that was born among them. Half of them over against Mount Gerizim, and half of them over against Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded before they should bless the people of Israel. And afterward he read all the words of the law. I wonder how many folks would stay through that service. Well, on this occasion, all of them. You going to read the whole thing? Can you not give me a synopsis of it? I mean, the main points are what? Do you have a PowerPoint? He read the whole law. Why? They're in the land, and this is going to have to govern them. Have they learned some lessons already about doing what God tells them to do? Well, should they be reminded of what God told them to do? Well, they need to be reminded. And so he brings these words before them, and it's on Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. An easy way that at least it's been easy for me to remember, you say, where were the blessings pronounced and where were the curses pronounced? And the blessings were on Mount Gerizim, and that's good, isn't it? And so blessings are good, and so Gerizim starts with a G, and so the good things happen in Gerizim. Blessing. Evil starts with an E, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. And so the evil things are pronounced on Mount Ebal. And so I'm able to kind of separate those out. So I kind of get those mixed up. Which one was which? And so that helps us do that. And after he read all the words of the law, the blessings and the cursing, now, people respond better just to blessing, don't they? Well, why was Joshua on his face crying, and he and all the elders had dust on their heads in chapter 7? Because they disobeyed God. Did they receive the curse of God? Absolutely. You want to avoid those curses, don't you? So these folks need to know God meant what he said. There's some things that God expected them to do that God would bless them in. There's some things that God expected them not to do, and he would curse them if they did. And so did they need to know both? Well, certainly. They need to know both. The blessings and the cursings, according to all that is written in the book of the law. So this must have been an extended service. You didn't get to make it to the cafeteria to eat, because you had to wait till all the law, the blessings and the cursings. Couldn't you say, do the blessings this Sunday and the cursing next Sunday? Could this be this could be a whole quarter series, couldn't it? You know, you get that mindset of these people are now in the promised land. And there's some high expectations that God has of them, because he's keeping every single thing he's promised them, he's keeping. What does he expect of them? Every single thing. He doesn't expect to have any slackers. Ask Achan. He means for you to do what he tells you to do. He will not bless you and let you be successful if you're not going to represent him. We need to learn those kind of lessons today. These things are written aforetime, were written for our learning. We might, through that process, understand how we can have hope. But we do that through practicing those things that God has said. I'm not trying to encourage all of you to preach long sermons every Sunday. But what I am encouraging you to do is make sure you understand that God has blessings and cursings for our life. Blessings when we do what he tells us to do. Cursings are sure if you disobey him. Listen to this. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 and verse 7. Ye which are troubled, rest with us, when the Lord Jesus shall be revealed from heaven with his mighty angels in flaming fire, taking vengeance on those that know not the Lord, obey not the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. I emphasize the last part of that to get people to understand God means what he said. He's going to punish the disobedient. You know how the verse starts? You which are troubled, rest with us. He's saying to Christians, you're doing the right thing. God's going to bless you. You don't get dismayed. You don't be discouraged. What was Joshua told, and what's Joshua telling the people by rehearsing this law? Don't get discouraged. Don't get dismayed. God's going to bless you when you serve him. But neither do you get apathetic and forget what God's told you. You see, those things are true in the New Testament context also. We need to see that God is a God of compassion and love, and he intends to keep his promise both to bless and to curse. These are not new things. As soon as he told the Israelites why he would bring them out of Egypt, to keep the promise he made to their father Abraham, he told them who was in the land. He told them why the people in the land were going to be destroyed, because their iniquities were full. He told them that would be their responsibility to do it. And when they kept His commandments, He would bless them. In fact, Moses put it into context in Deuteronomy chapter 30. He said, I place before you this day blessings and cursings. And then He described that process, and He said, I place before you this day life and death. Now listen, choose life and live. Well, if you don't choose life, you're not going to live. Who are you going to blame that on? Can't blame it on God, because He said, if you choose life, you're going to live. I'm going to bless you. Well, you see, if you don't do what I tell you to do, you've chosen death. And I'm going to curse you. And in fact, He said, these people I mentioned to you, if you don't utterly destroy them, they will become thorns in your eyes. And I will use them to drive you out. Did He make it clear to them? So why are they rehearsing it now? So they can't forget it. Now, did God mean what He says? Sometimes we get caught up in the victories and say, the Lord's wonderful, and He is. But then we say, since He's so wonderful, we're just going to enjoy His wonderful blessings. We don't realize there are things we still have to do. There's still things He expects of us. What are we going to do with those wonderful blessings? Well, they're in the land. They've had these victories. What do they got to do now? Keep on driving these enemies out. And we'll learn, as long as they do that, they're successful. When we get to chapter 9, we see in that context that the kings combine against Israel. They're kind of catching on, aren't they? You had these cities that faced the Israelites, and now folks began to realize it's going to take us banding together, folks, to face these folks. And it came to pass that all the kings, which were on this side of Jordan, in the hills and the valleys and all the coasts and the great sea, over against the Lebanon, the Hittites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and Jebusites. You heard those folks before. Did God tell them they were in the land? Yeah. Did He tell them He's going to give them into their hands? Yes. Now here those folks saying, but we're here. And we don't want to go anywhere. And those folks are coming. He said, what do we got to do? We better band together. And we better face them together. So they gathered themselves together to fight with Joshua and with Israel with one accord. And here you have the enemies of God in one accord. Sometimes you have the people of God not in one accord. Here you have the enemy in one accord. Now why? They have a common need. And that is face a common enemy. Well, we have a common enemy, the Christians, don't we? Remember we talked about Ephesians chapter 6 a little earlier? He described it. And motives and needs of fighting against us is described to us. But have we been equipped to face him? Absolutely. He tells us to stand up and face him. He did. And the armor he described, you can't be sitting down and put that kind of stuff on. You've got to stand up. Put on the whole armor of God and face him. So these enemies are gathered together in verse 3. And when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard that what Joshua had done unto Jericho and Ai, they did work wildly. What did the inhabitants of Gibeah do? They made up this story that we're not really from here. We're just passing through here. This is obviously a paraphrased version. And so in order to make that believable, what do? Kind of what some of the folks that come by my church building do. You know, they put on this image of, you know, this poor, distraught person who just undone, and, you know, their mother's died here and they're headed all down here, and I don't know how they got to Memphis, but anyway, they need help. And so these are a little more wily than that. And they think, you know, if we just go to them, they're going to know we're from here. And so we've got to look like we've been traveling a while. And so they put on these old garments, and they got moldy bread. Why? They traveled a journey and they took bread with them that's going to mold. And if they take fresh bread, what are you going to know? From around here. If you got fresh bread on you, so they got this old moldy bread, and they come to Joshua at Gilgal, Why did they come to Joshua at Gilgal? What did I tell you about Gilgal?
That's where he returns to after he fights.
That's where they have the staging area, and they'll stay there until they have fought these battles. And so they know where Joshua is. His reputation got around. It has. And so they go to Joshua there, and they tell their story. And it's a sad one. And they look the part. It's kind of hard to tell from human eyes. Like these people, bless their hearts, we come from a far country. Now, therefore, make ye a league with us. Now, if you just pause there, what would Joshua already know if he's staying focused?
Yes, God's counsel.
You don't make a league with anybody. Why? Because God already told Moses when he's given the law, when you get in that land and you defeat these nations, you do not make agreements with them. You are to destroy them. And here you have this great leader who has all these great qualities, but he's a compassionate man, and he hears this sad story, and he forgets an important instruction from the Lord. It become costly to them in a lot of ways, but here we have this struggle between Joshua, that compassionate man, and Joshua, that focused leader, saying, can't make a league with you, you know. I give you a head start. You can take your moldy bread and go somewhere else, but you're not going to be here and survive. You know, he could have said that, but he didn't. And they said unto Joshua, we be thy servants. Let's back up a verse. Verse 7. And the men of Israel said unto the Hivites, peradventure, ye dwell among us. And how shall we make a league with you? So that did they know the instruction? A better question is, did those men of Gibeon know the instruction? Can't make a league with folks around here. So what we got to look like? We're not from around here. You know, God didn't tell the Israelites, you got to go to Babylon and utterly destroy them, did he? Or Assyria at that time, or Nineveh at that time. He said the people of the land, name the people. And they're trying to say, we're not among these people, and so this doesn't apply to us. Sounds like some of the arguments folks use today, and that doesn't really apply to me. And they tell their story in a way where it doesn't appear to apply to them. And so they said unto Joshua, we are thy servants. And Joshua said unto them, who are you? And from whence come ye? And they said unto him, from a very far country. Thy servants are come because of the name of the Lord thy God. For we have heard the fame of him and all that he did to Egypt. Well, that part's true, isn't it? It's not true they came from a far country, but it's true they've heard about God. And all they did, and the 2 kings of the Amorites and that were beyond Jordan. Where have you heard that before? They mentioned the king by name. Sihon, king, and Og.
Good.
Who else said that?
Rahab.
Rahab specifically mentioned those battles as being attributed to God of the Israelites. And so has that been widespread? It has. Did they get it right? They did. But they're still lying about it. Therefore our elders and all the inhabitants of our country spake to us, saying, take victuals with you for the journey. In other words, it's going to be a long one. And boy, you can see by our molded bread, this has been a long journey. Look at our old clothes and our old shoes. It's been a tough travel. You take these victuals and you go meet them and say unto them, we are your servants, and therefore now make ye league with us. And God has specifically already told them, you just do not do it. And this is our bread. We took hot from our provisions out of our houses on the day that we came forth to go unto you. But now, behold, it is dry, and it is moldy. Can you deny it? Look at my old car, you know. You see the license plates on it? The tires worn out. The kids are sitting out there and they're hungry. So we understand from a compassionate standpoint how stories touch it. And you don't ever get where the stories don't touch you. But you got to stay focused and say, what God tell me to do, and how am I supposed to do it? So you have to narrow your focus and say, what are we talking about here? And can you see some questions that Joshua and the people could have asked? They asked some good questions. Where are you from? Did they get the answer? What follow-up question when they said, from a very far country?
How far?
Yeah. How far and which country? Couldn't they have? You know, if they'd sat down toward Egypt, the Israelites would have pretty good working knowledge of every country along the way. If it was from beyond the river, then where did Abraham come from? From beyond the river, so they'd have a fair working knowledge of the history of those folks. So if they mention some of those, they might say, you know, there's relatives there. Never heard of you. Hey, you want to break up the party when somebody comes and tell you a sob story to say, we have to do this at Cordova. I say, have to. We've chosen to. In our benevolent efforts, we say, okay, you know, give us some names of people that know you, and we can call and verify that. We certainly want to help you and address your needs. But we're stewards of the Lord's funds, and, you know, we don't want to squander it on somebody that's deceptive. And so give us some names. And I had a lady do that the other day. I'm not in charge of that, but the deacon who is in charge wasn't there, and this was an immediate situation. The woman comes in, she's crying, and I mean, sad story. Kid taken away from her. A large portion of it true, but the reason they're taken away were left out. Sad story. Obvious need. She's sitting in our parking lot with a tire she'd driven probably 10 miles on. Obvious, you can't say she doesn't have a flat tire. She does. And so the tire got to be replaced, or she's going to be on our parking lot for a while. So there's some obvious things that you can address. But she sat there in my office, and she mentioned some people's names. And I said, can you give me somebody I can call? And she mentioned another congregation, another place. And I said, okay. I'm getting ready to teach a Bible class. And I said, well, give me a minute. And I know the people there, and I'll give them a call. And so I called the church building over there, and she's sitting in my office. Just so happened nobody answered at the moment. And I said, well, here's what we'll do. We'll take care of the tire. We'll give you something to eat. I did this on my own. I didn't obligate the church for it. I said, I've got a gas station up the road that I trade with, and so I'll try to squeeze in some time before I start the Bible class, and I'll run by there and tell them to fill your tank up with gas. But that's all you get is gas. So I put that on my account. And so I teach the Bible class, and I had other things I got to do, a hospital visit, and got to teach a class at the school of preaching, and come back, and I get a call back from that congregation. They said, whatever you do, don't help her. She is a liar and a thief. Well, it's a sad, those are real tears. She was good at it. And so when you put yourself in Joshua and these people's place, and these folks there with their worn out clothes and their moldy bread, sounds believable, doesn't it? And so you can see where they'd have a moment of pause, and they look at those garments and they see that bread, but you think they could have been a little bit more studious. I guess I could have said, if I get a call back and they say you're legitimate, I'll put gas in your car. But we put a tire on her vehicle, we put food in her stomach, and we put gas in her tank. And she's on her way. But those are things that when the Holy Spirit records these things for us, it puts it in real terms so we can see why people respond the way they do. And the men took their victuals and asked not counsel at the mouth of the Lord. Why not? We took this bread out hot, and we see it's molded, and these are bottles of wine which we filled and new, and look, they're rent, and our shoes are old. They took their victuals and they asked not the counsel at the mouth of the Lord. And Joshua made a peace with them, made a league with them, and let them live. Who did Joshua have access to that he didn't exercise here? God. Had he approached God before and asked direction? He had. Had he received instruction? He had. And every time God gave him instructions, were they successful? They were. And every time they didn't, were they successful? They weren't. Is there a simple moral to any of this story? You know, God's not going to speak to us directly, but He has spoken to us directly through His Word. We ought to seek His counsel and say, did I do that wrong? And we ought to spend a little time at seeking counsel from His Word and doing these things. And when we don't seek His counsel, then we're going to make decisions that will affect us from now on. This decision to help these folks and make this league, even though Joshua just rehearsed all the law before the people. Included in that law would have been, don't do it. Except in these circumstances. He said, don't do it. What else could they have done? Well, I don't know. But I know what they shouldn't have done. Should not have made the league. Came to pass at the end of 3 days after they'd made a league with them, they heard that they were neighbors. And they dwelt among them. Why didn't they say, let's wait and check it out? They didn't. Why not? Well, after a while you start saying, you know, let's just expedite this thing. Let's make a decision, get this off of our books. And we got to deal with these folks. What are we going to do with them? And so that comes back to haunt them. The children of Israel journeyed and came into their own cities on the third day. And now their cities were Gibeon, Kephirah, Beerah, and Kirjath-jearim. And the children of Israel smote them not, because the princes of the congregation had sworn unto them by the Lord God of Israel. And all the congregation murmured against the princes. Why? But all the princes said unto them all, the congregation, we have sworn unto them by the Lord God of Israel. Now therefore we may not touch them. What have they been conditioned to do, the Israelites? Go in and utterly destroy them. What have they done at Jericho? What have they done at Ai? What are they prepared to do at these cities? Now you see what happens when you start making leagues and adjusting and tweaking what God had said? Not only is this going to come back to haunt you in the sense that you're going to have to defend this people that you made this pact with against these other kings because you sworn, but now you're diminishing in the eyes and hearts of people the passion they had to go out and destroy the enemy. That will come back to haunt them in their history. They'll finally just not defeat the enemy. And so these things become significant. We can't overlook them. There's a reason why these things are written, so that we can learn. And through patience and comfort of the Scriptures, we might have hope. We'll finish chapter 9 and we'll take another break. It says, this will we do. We will even let them live, lest wrath be upon us, because of the oath which we swear unto them. And the princes said unto them, let them live, but let them be hewers of wood and drawers of water unto all the congregation, as the princes that had promised them. And Joshua called for them, and he spake unto them, saying, wherefore have you beguiled us, saying, we are very far from you, when you dwell among us. See, obviously these folks did lie, and they went to great extents to be deceptive, but Joshua and the people didn't go to a whole lot of extent to check it out. Because now they did find out. Did they not find out early? Well, the answer would have been yes. They didn't take the time to do it. Now therefore you are accursed, and there shall none of you be free from being bondmen, hewers of wood, and jars of water for the house of my God. So now in essence he kind of trying to appease things and saying, okay, you're going to be punished, and God's going to be rewarded. But God's reward is in His people being obedient. God doesn't need drawers of water or hewers of wood, does He? Who did He intend to do that? His people. And when it came to worshiping God, who do you expect to take care of those kind of matters? The tribe of Levi and the priestly people. God already taken care of that, so He doesn't need help. But it kind of appeases the folks. Say, now we've got servants. We don't have to do that work. And these were menial tasks that were customarily left for the women to do, and men weren't allowed to do them, so they take these men of Gibeon, and what do they make them do? Those things that should insult them and demean them. But what did they say they would do? They said, if you'll spare our life, what will we be? Your servants. Now, what would you rather be? A jar of water, a hewer of wood, or dead? They'd already made that choice. That's why they went through the deception and say, we'd rather live. And so this is not necessarily a punishment to these people, because they already made that decision themselves. They answered Joshua and said, because it was certainly told thy servants how the Lord thy God commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land, destroy all the inhabitants of the land from before you. Therefore we were sore afraid of our lives because of you, and have done this thing. Did they get it right? They had it exactly right. Did they know what God said to Moses? They did. Now, won't you be shocked when you get to the book of Judges and they don't remember that? That is, the children of Israel don't remember that. They don't know Jehovah, nor the great things he's done. And these heathen folks go to great extent to say, we believe Jehovah. We know what he told you, and we don't want to die, because we believe he's going to keep his word. But see, his people didn't keep their word. Now, behold, we're in thy hands, as it seemeth good and right unto thee, do unto us. They said, we've already given this thought. And they'd given it more thought than Joshua had. And they gave it more thought than the nation of Israel did. They said, we've already thought this through. We're going to be dead men if you keep God's commandments, because he told you to kill us. And so now they have connived a league, and so if they're going to die now, they're going to die now. But they know the children of Israel are going to keep their oath. And so did he unto them deliver them out of the hand of the children of Israel, and they slew them not. And Joshua made them that day hewers of wood and drawers of water for the congregation, and for the altar of the Lord, even unto this day, in the place which he should choose. And so that kind of appeased at least the conscience of them to say, we're going to get some good out of it. They're going to do some of our chores, and after all, we'll make them do some of those things in the house of the Lord, so maybe the Lord will be pleased. But it's not over yet. You know, they made this league, and now they're going to have to back up. And guess how that's going to come? They're going to have to fight these people's battles. And we'll see that in just a moment. We'll take a break and come back and pick up with chapter 10.